I'm your host, Tom Stafford. Welcome to this first Rory Afire Programme Funder Forum. I'm just going to introduce Rory and the Afire Programme very, very briefly, and then we're going to move on to our speaker. This event is being recorded, but we will stop the recording after the talk so we can afford free discussion. So Rory, as you'll all be familiar with, is Research on Research Institute. We have 18 core partners across 12 countries, and within the Rory Institute, we have 10 programs like that you can see there, like Grail, looking at responsible use of AI, Agora, looking at national assessment systems, and Afire, which is Rory's program on experiments on the research system. And by experiments, we mean not just conducting them, but we want to raise awareness of the ability to do experiments, enthuse people about doing experiments, build capacity within the research and the research funding system to do experiments in research on research, increase the uptake of experimental evidence, the better use of evidence, and encourage a culture of experimentation where people feel that it's not only possible, but necessary to commit to innovating and evaluating those innovations. So we've got kind of three strands in the Afire program. We've got the forum, where we want to showcase great examples of experimentation. We've got support, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later, where we want to help working with our funder partners to build capacity to experiments. And then we have examples of individual experiments, which we're working with partners on. So here we are at the beginning of the forums series. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Anders, for agreeing to kick off our seminar series. We've got 6 planned, and we hope to add a few more in the next month or so up until the summer autumn of 2025, showcasing examples of funders who have done experimental work. And by that, what we mean is not just innovating, but committing to the rigorous evaluation of innovations or trials of mechanisms and the sharing of that work. So that's why I'm really pleased we've got Anders Smith from the Willem Foundation here today, because as you'll see from his talk, not only have they tried some new things with their funding mechanism, but they're committed to the rigorous evaluation and the sharing of that, and the first publications are already coming out from that project. As well as the forums, I mentioned we want to work on improving support for the people to run experiments or evaluate innovations. And so we're planning what we're calling sprints. These will be kind of focused meetings. We're imagining a smaller group focused on a particular topic, meeting regularly, maybe 6 times, 2 hours every fortnight, 90 minutes every fortnight for sort of 5 or 6 times to really move forward on particular issues. We've got 2 leading candidates for topics. One is recruiting peer reviewers. The other is a kind of introduction on the essentials of randomized control design and implementation. We're not sure which we're going to be doing first. If you're registered for the forums, you will get updates on these. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Anders Smith from the Willem Fundent. He has a PhD in physics. He has a career in publishing, research, and research administration, and for 5 years he's been head of the program at the foundation. Head of program at the Willem Foundation. So, Anders, unless you have anything to add, I will hand over to you. And I think you're expecting to speak for about 30 minutes, and that should leave us time for discussion.
Thank you. So I'll just try to take over the sharing.
I will just try to stop it. Excellent, that's worked.
Okay, so I hope you're seeing my slides now.
Yes.
Uh, Good. So thank you, Tom, for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to speak to Rory and Afire. I think it's very important that funders are actively pursuing ways to get better in handing out research grants because it's certainly a very important part of university research as conducted today. So I will try to tell you a bit about the Willem Experiment program we have been running for several years at the Willem Foundation, or Willem Fonden in Danish. Let me start out by briefly uh, telling you a bit about the foundation. So the smiling gentleman you can see is Willem Kant Rasmussen. He was a Danish civil engineer and inventor. He had lots of ideas, crazy ideas. One of them was really good. That was the Velux window. You can see it beneath him, and I can perhaps also show that my home office is Velux compliant. Um, but anyway, uh, this window was invented in 1942, and after the war, um, it played a big role in the build-up of the inner cities in Europe because it allowed the unused attics in the buildings to be used for living. So that grew to be quite a significant business. In the beginning of the 70s, when he had to give over the company to the next generation, he decided to turn most of the shares over to a foundation, the Willem Foundation, um, in the realization that his company was only successful because he had had a free education as a civil engineer. He had a highly trained workforce. He had a stable society in which his company thrived. So he wanted to give back to society some of that to help propagate those conditions. And created this philanthropic foundation, which still is the majority shareholder in the Velux and other companies in the group. So 90% of the proceeds from selling windows are going out as philanthropic grants. Our main grant area is the technical and natural science area, where I am. Uh, the foundation as a whole gives out about approximately 1 billion Danish kroner a year. And about 60% is going to technical and natural science. So in Denmark, it's kind of unique that very many of the big companies, Carlsberg, Novo Nordisk, the Velux Group, they are owned by foundations, and many of those support research. So private foundations actually account for quite a significant share of the funding, the research funding in Denmark. And the Willem Foundation has, you could say, a market share of 15 to 20% of all the competitive funding at the universities in Denmark within technical and natural science. So we play quite a significant role, and that also means that we have a large responsibility to act in a way that doesn't destroy the system, you could say. So I'll just very briefly give you an overview of our programs. And this is mainly to say that most of our grant programs within technical and natural science are sort of traditional people-oriented grants. We have a saying, people, not projects, when we fund, and that's true for most of our grant schemes, but not for the experiment. But we have an international postdoc program at the moment earmarked for women. We have a young investigator, and for the starting research leader, we have an investigator grant for the established leaders. We have a synergy program where we bring together data science and another field. We have an annual award. My boss likes to call it the Danish Nobel Prize, which it's not, but it's yeah, rather prestigious in Denmark at least. So all these are people-oriented grants. And then we have the Wilhelm experiment, and you can say that the start of that was the question, is the conventional peer review funding system, you know that you have a committee of scientists, they meet, they read proposals, they read CVs, they discuss, and they come to some form of consensus, perhaps also based on external peer reviews. So is this sort of excluding or missing out on conventional ideas? Uh, I have two examples from recent experiment projects. Can you build a battery from rust? A researcher asking himself, well, instead of lithium, could you use rust and salt water as the couples in an electrochemical cell and store large amounts of electricity? Or a researcher who wanted to go to Costa Rica and catch a jellyfish, bring it back and fixate it in the lab, which always seemed to me to be the most challenging part of the project, and then try to show it pictures of mangrove roots while stimulating it electrically to see if they could learn something even if they have no brain. So if you put this forward to a conventional panel, there is a risk that the panel will look at the proposal and look at you and say, well, this is too crazy, and why is a reputable researcher putting forward such ideas? Or even if that doesn't happen, maybe there is a reluctance on the part of the researcher to put forward such ideas. So the idea of the experiment is that if you can submit your proposal anonymously, you will be more willing to take risks in your ideas. And I can just say that these are two actual projects, and when I saw them, my feeling was that well, maybe you can build a battery from rust, but you can certainly not teach a jellyfish anything. And it turned out to be completely opposite, that you cannot actually do a useful battery from rust, but actually the guy who did the jellyfish showed that they can have some form of associational learning, even if they only have 10, 20 neurons that are connected all around it and have no central nervous system. So that just goes to show that I mean, you can't really trust your gut feeling in these matters. But anyway, that's sort of the motivation for the experiment program, to focus only on the idea. And the evaluation, as I said, is double blind. So the evaluation panel does not know who the applicants are, and the applicants don't know who are in the panel. We also wanted to ensure that this is not driven by consensus. There is a tendency in committee meetings that, for instance, the one who speaks first can frame or direct the discussion in a way that might also be detrimental to really innovative ideas. So we actually don't let the panel meet and discuss. Then a little bit about sort of what kind of projects we support. They're open to researchers at any career stage. So this is also interesting because postdocs and professors really compete on an equal footing because their past history is not part of the evaluation. Then the project should be hosted by a Danish university. The grants are 2 million Danish kroner for 2 years, and that typically means that you can fund a postdoc, which either can be the PI or someone hired by the PI, and some consumables, apparatus, technical assistance, etc. We do not fund PhD scholarships, and that's sort of from the philosophy that we want to encourage risk-taking, and PhD students should get a degree in the end, and it wouldn't be fair to them to sort of hang them out with some crazy idea. So we only fund postdocs, basically, and the other categories. We've had 8 rounds so far and around 50 grants per round. To sort of briefly sum up the philosophy of the experiment program, you may be familiar with these 4 stages in the acceptance of a scientific idea that's due to Haldane. And if we have to put the aims of the experiment a bit facetiously, it is to move ideas from 1 to 2. From the stage where you sketch out an idea on a napkin in the lunchroom and your colleague sitting to the right of you smiles a bit superstitiously and say, this will never work, to something that well, there might be something in it. So the ideal experiment project is not incremental research based on ongoing activities, and indeed you cannot really explain how it fits into your ongoing activities because you cannot identify it yourself. And we welcome bold ideas which may fail. So I can say we are maybe even surprised that so many succeed at some level, and we would certainly expect to see more failing projects. So we don't require a proof of concept beforehand. We don't have this usual concept of feasibility in the evaluation, and we do not expect that a project will bring a new idea to complete fruition because this is meant to start it up. And the ideal case would be to bring the idea to the stage where you can apply in the conventional grant program, whether it's a national or a European program. The proposal is designed to be as light as possible. So it's a 3-page proposal. We have defined what people have to answer. I can perhaps add a few comments to appropriateness, where they have to argue why their project will not be fit for a conventional research program, and probable objections, what would a reviewer probably object. And these are kind of difficult in the beginning, but also rather fun to write. Then a very simple budget, a letter of support, which basically should state that the host institution will host the project if granted. So no need to write a long story about how it fits into the department strategy, etc. It's just to state that it can be carried out at the institution. And then a CV in any format, and I'll just explain why a CV when it's anonymous. And everything is available on our homepage, so it's rather a transparent process. There are no milestones, there are no work packages, there are no Gantt diagrams, which in the beginning some applicants found a bit scary, but now they have actually discovered that it's perhaps even more fun to write without Gantt diagrams. We do a survey of our grantees every year and ask them how much time they spent preparing the proposal, and the average seems to be around 40 hours, which may be short or long, depending on the perspective, but a reasonable amount of time. And we hope that most of the time is actually used to come up with a really good idea. Then we have a review panel, and that consists of 21 recognized researchers. We pick them so that they are unrelated to Danish research institutions. Of course, in the international world of science, everyone collaborates with everyone, but we at least try to avoid those with a very major part of their research with Danish collaborators, simply to make sure that that they will not be able to guess from the subject who is doing the research. Uh, and the proposal, of course, you cannot refer to your past publications. You cannot refer to your past work. Uh, so you can only sort of talk of state of the art in a very generic manner. And the researchers from the panel are strongly discouraged to do detective work to try to figure out who is behind the application. We do ask them whether they can see it, because sometimes people are careless and leave in names or institutions in their proposal, but that's very few. So the panel is divided into 4 sub-panels based on subject matter, and you will realize that these researchers really have to read broadly. So the ERC has not 21 researchers, but 21 panels to cover what we are trying to cover. And we can simply not handle anything bigger than this. So we make a point of telling the panel members when we recruit them that they have to read broadly. This is a particular challenge for small fields such as mathematics and astronomy, where you may only get 10, 15 applications um, every year, and we cannot have 3 mathematicians associated with the panel. But we also tell the applicants that they have to write broadly. So there are no meetings, there are no interaction between the panel members. We really do not want consensus. And all reviewing is done in our online portal. So the selection process is as follows. So the Wilhelm Foundation doesn't support health-related research. So there's an administrative pre-screening of the topic where the secretariat, that means me, checks that no one is applying to do cancer research or health-related research in any way. But then the proposal and the budget is sent on to the scientific review panel. Each proposal is read by 3 panel members. Each panel member has 1 decisive vote, and that means if a panel member decides to use his or her decisive vote, the project will be forwarded for funding or recommended for funding to the board, no matter what the other panel members think. I'll get back to that shortly. And then we simply rank the applications and have a final CV screening check, which is not I mean, this is a formality to ensure that no theoretical physicists propose to go catch tadpoles in the local pond, but no one has failed this screening so far. So this is really a formality. And then the final recommendation is forwarded for confirmation in our board. And the panel never sees the CVs, and the CV does truly not play a role in their decision. We ask the panel members to assess the proposals on the 3 criteria. You can see what they are here. Originality, potential impact, and appropriateness. And based on this, we ask the panel member to give an overall score. And because the panel members have to read broadly outside their own field, we also ask them how certain or how confident are you in your assessment. And this we bring forward because then we simply score on an ERC-like scale, where I'm always confused that outstanding is something much better than excellent, but that's the way it is. And then simply do a numerical average, and then rank them. The confidence level, how certain the reviewers or the panel members are, is used as a tiebreaker if two proposals are equaled. We do sort of a demand-driven distribution such that the four sub-panels get the same success rate. And that's also in some part to there are different traditions in different fields on how you use these scales, and that can be difficult to compare across very wide fields of research. So we break them down in these sub-panels, and then each sub-panel have a number of proposals forwarded for funding, which corresponds to the same success rates across the board. Then there's this decisive vote that I mentioned that sort of short circuits the evaluation. And this is also this to capture the outliers, capture the ideas that really are divisive, but may hold a lot of promise. It has taken some work to get the panel to use it. In the beginnings, people were saying, but that's, I mean, that's cheating, or that's I don't want to do that. But it is part of the philosophy that we want to also try to identify something out of the ordinary. So this year, 16 decisive votes out of a possible 21 have been cast, and 9 projects would not have been funded without the decisive vote. We also see very rarely that the same proposal gets 2 decisive votes, but in general, there's a nice distribution that some of the decisive votes go to projects that would have been funded in any case, and some identify projects that would not have been funded without the decisive vote. As I mentioned, we give out approximately 50 grants per year. We've had 8 rounds so far. We have 200 ongoing projects. COVID meant that we had a lot of project delays, but we seem to have reached a steady state with around 175 to 200 active projects at any given time. You see a steady increase in the number of applications for the first 4 years. At that point, we decided we had to do something about it because the success rates were dropping and the workload of the panel was increasing. So we decided that you were not allowed to apply 2 years in a row. And the number of applications began to drop, and we thought that's great. But this was also during COVID, and it's unclear whether it's solely due to this restriction in the number of applications you can send. In any case, after 2022, the number of applications have picked up again, and we have actually tried to do a bit of modeling together with Dr. Stephen Wooding from he's in Cambridge. You might be familiar with him. He's doing also a lot of research on research. And he suggests that we will actually top out again somewhere around 550 applications per year. That's too many because there's the consideration that we actually take out a lot of effort from the research community when they have to write these proposals. The success rates, which are at present at 12-13%, would drop even more. And the panel would have to be expanded significantly. So next year we are actually going to do an experiment in demand management where we will offer a number of tickets for the right to apply. We will have people send in simply a title and say, I want to apply with this title. and then we will draw 350 tickets, and they will then get the right to send in an actual proposal. Uh, we are sort of a little bit, yeah, we look forward to how that goes. I mean, that will be something new for us. We hope that it will be welcomed by the community, but it's sort of the name experiment sort of also gives us an obligation to experiment, I think, and that's anyway our excuse. So you might ask, does it work, this Willem experiment? And let me start out with some anecdotal evidence, which is encouraging. I mean, so the interesting thing is that as I mentioned, postdocs and professors compete on an equal footing. They have more or less the same success rates. Postdocs a little bit smaller, but not significantly smaller. Um, so you would think that this is mostly for the young people who cannot get their sort of their foot on the first step of the ladder. But what we are hearing also from very established professors is that this is a unique possibility for them to change their direction. So we are hearing the grant allowed me to change directions after 30 years. And this may be people with a large research group, but a research group working in a certain direction. And if you try to apply outside of that direction in a conventional grant program, people will say, why is she doing that? I mean, she's usually doing this. Why should you go over to that direction? And it will be very difficult, or at least people feel that it will be very difficult to change direction. That the experiment allows. Some are saying to us, this is the most impactful idea of my entire career, and this has led to major grants, etc. The two news stories is an experiment projects on tipping points that turned out actually to be slightly wrong, but led the PI to a subsequent ERC Advanced grant, where he did some analysis of the ocean currents and say that they might collapse within a few years. We also had a young biologist. She wanted to try detecting airborne DNA from wild animals in a sort of a glorified vacuum cleaner, and everyone was saying that was too crazy. And it actually turned out to be an extremely useful tool to screen biodiversity. And the format in general generates a lot of enthusiasm in the research community. The interesting thing is that, of course, the people who get it are happy, but also the people who don't get it seem to be very sort of inspired by the process of writing a proposal along these lines, getting back to what sort of drove them into science in the first place, namely the this spirit of play and finding new ideas and not just being evaluated on age factors and which journals you publish in. So it generates a lot of goodwill and and that's good. And that's also reflected in the many proposals we receive. So that's of course sort of a double-edged sword. But in any case, we are happy that we have created a grant instrument that seems to fill a need. And it inspires a lot of enthusiasm among the panel members, and perhaps that's even more extraordinary. I've just put up a few unsolicited comments that people are also really enjoying reading these proposals. And I mean, these are very experienced professors, very experienced grant evaluators, and they also find extremely refreshing that they are asked to assess an idea, a scientific idea. They're not asked to assess whether work package 2 leads on to work package 3 and the management structure is satisfactory, or the experience of the PI matches what is going to be done in the project. Because, I mean, that's of course important in conventional big projects, but it's perhaps not very exciting as a scientist to evaluate projects on. So they really like reading these proposals, and they also like the opportunity to read widely and to sort of being asked to be inspired and whether something grasps their attention. So that's good. And then, as Tom mentioned, we have also actually commissioned a scientific study by the Danish Center for Studies in Research and Research Policy. And they are doing a more systematic study of whether the outcome of the experiment indeed differs from that of conventional grant programs. So the study has had access to all the proposals, including the rejected proposals, all CVs, all review scores, which is rather a unique data set for research on research to be conducted on, I think. So you know that the bibliometric outputs have a significant time delay, so there are not very many quantitative studies out of this project yet, but there are a lot of preliminary studies, and one of the so some of the conclusions are that this feels different to the grant holders. The focus on the idea, the opportunity to change directions is really important, and it means something to the grant holders. Past performance, as measured by publication and citation activity, is not a predictor of whether you get a project or not. And the decisive vote actually is important and plays a significant role. This study is running out shortly, and we're actually considering to have a call for a new research on research project utilizing the data behind the Wilhelm experiment. This is something we're thinking about because we feel that it is of interest to explore these matters more. So let me just end by an outlook. I hope to have given you a taste of the unique possibilities of a double-blind review. Of course, it's not suitable for all grant schemes. I mean, when you have a really large project, managerial aspects have to play a role in the conduct of the project, and for that you need some indication of whether the PI can manage a large project. So it's not sort of for all grant schemes. Some of the other possibilities we have discussed and other people have discussed is to do it as the anonymous evaluation as one step in a multi-step process. Maybe, I mean, difficult also because if the larger the project becomes, the more feasibility plays a role, and how to match that with the anonymous evaluation is perhaps a challenge. Then the lottery, where we feel a key concern if you do a lottery is the legitimacy of the project selected and the legitimacy of the foundation, because the board has an obligation to spend the foundation's money wisely and is doing a lottery the right way. Also, we have been looking at the distribution of evaluation scores in the experiment, and there is sort of no obvious cutoff beyond which all projects are clearly unsuitable, so that you can draw a lot between the rest. Finally, a distributed peer review, where you make the applicants review each other, is an interesting option, but probably better suited for more focused thematic or for specific fields, because only directed at those. I know they do them in telescope time proposals, etc. So anyway, that was the Wilhelm experiment grant scheme, and I look forward to the discussion.